What's up, everybody, and welcome to the first ever Chasing Sixx podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Chase.
And I'm takesixx.
And welcome to the first ever podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the 2021 US Grand Prix.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It was a great race. A little bit boring in the middle, to be completely fair.
Yeah, that middle was soft.
That middle stint, we'll talk about that in the strategy calls later, was a little lame. But other than that, it was a pretty entertaining race.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with it. I enjoyed it. A good old Max and Lewis fight coming down to the wire. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but that last 3 laps, we were literally standing up.
Yeah, we'll get to the predictions at the beginning of this too at some point, because we both thought that something was going to happen turn 1, and it looked like it was about to. It was right off the hop. Verstappen just went straight to the left, completely cut off all the track to Hamilton.
Pushed him so wide.
And then Hamilton was like, okay, I'll just do it back.
Yeah, it was great, honestly. So I guess that's a great place to jump into the predictions. So I predicted Lando Norris getting his first win. What else did I have down there? I had Lando.
You had Norris?
I had Lando, and then Checo, Charles, Danny Rick, and then Carlos Sainz. I was really banking on there being a Lewis and Max incident in the first few turns, and that's kind of how I made my prediction from there, but that didn't happen, so it totally whiffed on that.
Yeah.
I was close, though, with Sergio.
Yeah, you were close with Sergio. My predictions from there was I actually had Verstappen first, then Perez, Hamilton, Bottas, and Rick, and I was off. I got Verstappen right and Rick right in 5th. Seth, our friend who doesn't even watch F1, nailed the podium, because that's just F1 these days. You know that it's going to be... We've got the new podium, hopefully, of Verstappen, Hamilton, Perez.
Yeah.
But...
we thought way too hard about this. I think that was our issue, was we put way too much thought, research, and just how many situations we're going to go on, and he was just like, well, this is probably most likely what's going to go down.
Yeah, I never watch F1, but when I do, this is usually how it goes.
Yeah, he played it.
He played it by the numbers.
But to be honest, though, for what you could say is a predictable top 10, it was a hell of a race for a predictable top 10.
It was a good race, and there's a lot of great things to talk about it. For one, we can talk about the fans. 400,000 in attendance at the US Grand Prix. This is massive.
Amazing to see. Amazing.
Yeah. This is, as of right now, I got to double check the numbers, because it is more than Indy 500 earlier this year, but it is the largest attendance in North America as it is right now for a sporting event. So that's a big one there. And the flair of the event was amazing.
400,000. I think that might I have no idea. I'm pulling this out of off my ass, but that might be the largest sporting event of the year so far, motorsport or anything. Because I'm trying to think the biggest thing would probably be soccer or football for the
music
European
festival, right?
Yeah,
music festivals get up there too, but
at 400,000, you just don't have that much space at a soccer game or a music festival. Even I'm trying to think, Coachella is huge, but I don't even think they just have the square footage to keep those people.
Yeah, but it was great to have everybody back. And
amazing.
The fanfare. This was the first traditional podium that we've had in the past 2 years.
Amazing.
In the past 2 seasons, this is the first traditional podium with Shaq came in on a Longhorn caddy and parked the whole Red Bull team there. That was amazing.
That was easily the highlight of the race for me. Was the Shaq incident. That was, I don't even want to call it an incident, but the Shaq thing was definitely a top 10 highlight for me. I have no idea where that came from, where any of that prep came from, but seeing Shaq come through in the biggest Texas Cadillac I've ever seen was definitely one of the highlights.
Oh yeah, and it fit the entire mechanical team for all the techs, all the mechanics in the Red Bull garage fit in that thing.
Yeah, it was amazing to see. It was the funniest thing too was to see Shaq standing in the foreground, Lewis Hamilton standing on a 3-foot rising platform, and Shaq still being taller than Lewis.
Yeah,
I was dying of laughter.
That was pretty funny.
It just shows you how much of a freak of imagine trying to see Shaq in an F1 car. That would be comedy.
Yeah, the thing would have to be 40 feet long.
Yeah, and the best was you could fit one entire Red Bull pit crew or one Shaq and a trophy in that Cadillac was how you describe it.
It was pretty epic. Yeah, so and then from the race, of course, Max wins the race. Starts from P1 on pole with a great pole lap yesterday, and then comes out and actually gets the win. And they got it off an aggressive start, as we just talked about, argy-bargy at the beginning. And Perez being the perfect teammate and pulling out of that situation to not not hit Verstappen. But very aggressive start, but stayed on it, put a lot of pressure on Lewis. Lewis even saying on the radio, he's faster than me.
Yeah, that was intense. Because it was a flip to the script. It's usually Max sandwiched between two Mercs, and this time it was Lewis feeling the pressure being sandwiched between two Red Bulls. And I know it's a little late in the season, and Sergio's finally been able to pick it up, but he finally did exactly what Red Bull brought him in there to do, I felt like, this weekend.
Oh, this weekend, absolutely. Even last weekend in Turkey, he's come back from the summer break with a different fire under his belly. Like, at the beginning of this season, he had some great showings, like the win in Baku as well was just great stuff. And all weekend, he looked really good. He looked hooked up in that car all weekend. So I had him finishing in P2 for that reason. Now, P3 was very good, but Perez really did. I think the thing that screwed him really was the strategy.
Yeah. It's a Max first strategy at Red Bull, right? And that's not even a debate because you have to understand where they're coming from. But
yeah, I think it was just more that he used up a lot of tires.
Yeah, it's true.
They had to get used to this. The tire degs really hampered the strategy. It's really what kind of led to the win for Max as well.
I think the most ironic thing was the joke I made before the Grand Prix started about how Checo in the video game should have 99 on his tire day grid because that dude can baby tires, he was just ripping through them all race. So
his second stint, he went out on the mediums. He started out on the mediums, and then they had a used set of mediums because they didn't have any more tires. They had a new set of hards, but they're going to use those for the end. So they actually put him out on the used mediums, and he did about 18 laps on used mediums. When you start the race with used mediums, you did only 13. So he stretched them another 5 laps. But that kind of hampered him. But, to still finish on the podium, starting from P3, it did work out in the end, strategy-wise for him. But yeah, I expected more. He just had a lot more pace in the practice sessions. He was really there.
But if we want to talk about another driver that's been picking it up since the summer break, let's talk about Daniel Ricardo being at his home away from home, which is Texas. Nobody embraces the US GP like Mr. Daniel Ricardo. It's honestly comedical seeing him in the Texas Longhorns jersey, cowboy hat, fucking full Talladega Nights get up. It's amazing.
He was on a whole other vibe. I was expecting him to actually just pull out like a surprise podium as well, because he had great pace. He was hooked up in that car, but he was on a whole other vibe, and a lot of this is mental too.
Exactly.
So he showed up there. He had that great moment with Dale Earnhardt's senior's car. That everybody loved that too.
Everybody did.
The smile was bigger than the helmet can even showcase.
A dude who has an abnormally large smile already somehow found a way to get to a new level of abnormally large smile.
He unlocked a new level with that.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's Daniel, since he's come back from the summer break, has felt more like the Daniel Ricardo that you saw at Red Bull and in the peak Renault days, because he seems happy again. He doesn't seem frustrated that everything's not clicking with the car, and that he seems like, I think it was him who said that he didn't do any training during the summer break. He kind of just went back to Perth and decompressed, and that helped him a lot. I think sometimes you can overwhelm yourself with trying to get better and trying to catch up to somebody like Lando, who's been in that car, who they've been designing that car essentially for, and now he comes back refreshed with a new outlook. So yeah, you're right. The mental game is way more important than I feel like a lot of people give it credit for.
Oh yeah, and it's funny because Daniel they always talk about how Daniel, and he says it himself, that he's a nice guy off track, but in the car, he embodied the Dominator today. He 100% embodied the Dominator today.
Him and Carlos.
And his teammate too.
Yeah. Him and Lando got a little too close for comfort. Zach Brown was probably rubbing that Monza tattoo and worry when he saw them getting a little bit close and cheeky there.
Yeah, he got cheeky with Sainz. They're really on each other for that whole first lap, and then on that straight, Norris decided 3-1 was a good idea. And just sends it up the inside. And luckily, Sainz, even though he was sandwiched, was incredibly mature about the whole thing. Picked it right, got the better line and got out of it. But then he had to give it back, or did he give it back? And they had no, he did. He did end up eventually giving it back. But then Ricardo was there the whole time and fighting into it, and actually caused damage on the rear end of the Ferrari too, because he was just following a little too close.
There's a lot of close racing in this race.
We know you were in Dale's car like just recently, but you can't bump draft.
You can't go full cowboy, Daniel. We get it. You're in Texas. You've been here. It's a vibe. You've probably eaten more brisket than you could imagine, but you don't need to go full cowboy on us.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of close racing. It was, like you said, there was a lull in the middle where everybody just kind of had their paces, but it really seems like everybody at the very beginning and towards the end kind of came back nicely for some good driving. The only real incident on track was some Canadian on Canadian violence in the lap 1, corner 1.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if there was a big I'm sorry off between Lance and Nicholas.
Just I'm sorry.
Just perpetual Canadian standoff of them apologizing to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, that was all that you could really say about Lance Stroll.
That's all you could really say, about Lance and Nicholas Latifi, because the Williams started in a good spot with all the engine penalties. Nick wasn't that far. He wasn't in his usual 18th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he actually only finished one position back from where he started. Started in 14th. And even with Stroll, he had that really bad incident in that spin in the first lap, and it seemed like it was going to ruin his race. But he didn't actually move backwards. He actually moved forwards another position. So he still made the best of a bad situation. And, I mean, that's one thing a lot of people write off with Lance Stroll is that they always kind of want to look at, the big finishes and such. But, on his day, he's a great driver, and he's as great as any other driver. It's just that day is not always the same day.
No.
it's a little off sometimes. But this one, I find he was just completely unlucky. And he had a great drive to battle back to get another position.
Coming from the Aston Martin fan in me, do you think, I haven't even talked to you about this one yet, but do you think if Lance and Latifi didn't come together, we could have seen a double Aston Martin points finish, like a 9-10, because Seb got in there? I think maybe not. Maybe Lance would have been 11th. Maybe he would have gotten ahead of Giovinazzi.
You know what? I would say, no, I could have definitely seen a double points finish, because in the practice sessions,
they were good.
I think it was the second practice session. It was very surprising. Lance Stroll, I have to double check, was P5. P5 and P6 on pace on track.
That's what I'm saying. They had good
in the
pace.
long session. So he did have good pace. I mean, even after that spin, he was down so much time. He still finished up a position from where he started, but maybe helped a little bit by the double DNF from Alpine. But, I mean, still, you didn't move backwards.
Exactly. Hey, progress. As somebody as an Aston Martin fan who started the season riding the pink Mercedes hype, being like, oh, we're going to get third in the Constructors' Championship this year. Now I'm sitting here like, wow, we're closer to Williams and Alpine. And, hey, that Alpine double DNF definitely doesn't hurt our cause, but it was just painful to see. But let's talk about those DNFs. We had Gasly as a DNF. We had Ocon and Alonso both DNFing.
The Gasly one was odd. I can't remember. Well,
they gave us no clarification on the broadcast about it.
Even with the Alpines, they said that it was the rear wing had actually broken, and that's why they had to stop. I'm not entirely sure with Gasly. I thought it was something engine related. I was hoping it wasn't something engine related, because that's really what it's going to come down to at the end of this championship is all this engine reliability talk. But when it came to the Alpines, they were talking about the rear wing actually had been damaged, which is very easy to do, as we saw all race, especially from the camera footage in the driver cockpit, just how bumpy the track is. It is a very violent track in terms of suspension on an F1 car. And it's just a very used track. We're talking touring car with GT3 cars. We're talking IndyCar. We're talking NASCAR. Now we're talking Formula One. All race on this track. So it is a very bumpy road.
Yeah, you're right. It is one of the most multi-purposed tracks that I believe F1 does visit, if I'm not mistaken. Because there are some tracks on the circuit that it's like, people come here once a year and it's F1 and that's all this course does.
Yeah.
Or sorry, I might be wrong. Obviously they probably might do F2 or F3 there, but it's Formula Series racing and there's no other racing series that goes on there. Circuit of the Americas is one of the few last bastions of actual proper racetracks in the United States. It's them, Laguna, probably a few other ones I'm mistaken.
Watkins Glen is another one too, Daytona.
But it's not as plentiful as Europe, and it's a lot more American tracks are more built towards IndyCar, NASCAR, dome racing. Circuit of the Americas is a European style circuit in America.
Yeah, I think part of it too is just we always think about that 2005 Indianapolis incident that happened, is that if that incident didn't happen, if they actually were able to get around being able to have make a concession in the rules to allow pit stop, because at that time you weren't allowed to do pit stops, and the Michelins couldn't handle the bank turn. But if that incident didn't happen, I think F1 at that time would have exploded even further into the American market, because then you would have had Daytona, you would have had Sebring, you would have had a number of other races, but because of that, it wasn't happening. It's a multi-purpose track, as you were saying, and which is great that it gets that, because as we saw last year with Turkey and also with Portimao, is that when you have a freshly repaved track and nobody drives on it,
exactly,
you get no good racing because no one has traction.
It's a slip and slide, and then you add rain on top of that, and all of a sudden everybody's sliding everywhere, and it's just no fun at all.
Yeah,
I'm jealous. I wish I was there. The atmosphere and vibe there just looked freaking incredible. Seeing everybody like run to the track, like you said, the first proper podium in a while. It was really fun to see. It was a spectacle. There's no other way to put it. It was a spectacle.
Absolutely. The whole time we were watching it, my wife's like, "Why aren't we there?"
Yeah, exactly.
I can't not agree with her. I don't know why either. We should be there.
And like,
everyone should be there.
Not to get too far out of the F1 realm and into like the world, it was just nice to see on a reaffirmance level that like life is still existing. You know what I mean? Like, shout out to Texas for being a bit of a bastion of hope there to see, you know, live sporting prosper. So it was great to see there.
Absolutely. And there was not a single moment that you didn't realize it was Texas. They made it very sure that you were in Texas.
Oh yeah, if you watch the pre-race, when they were on the bus doing it around, they literally, all the drivers were handed cowboy hats. Like Daniel was like, "No, I got my own," and same with Mick. Mick, out of all people, also had his own cowboy hat.
Mick had his own cowboy hat.
Yeah, which is odd, but it makes sense because he mentioned that they have a ranch in Texas, which makes sense that the Schumachers would have a ranch in Texas, so he got to go home, which is another, again, mental aspect of it. There's something that is I get these guys are in different time zones all the time, but they've been in Europe for the last 2 years. This is the first race in North America since 2019.
Yep.
So it was nice to be on this side of the Atlantic. We didn't have to wake up super duper early to watch a race, which was nice.
Mm-hmm. And what's nice too is that with travel, like, this is where we're going to say, like, it sucks that we don't have the Canadian Grand Prix 2 years running now, but now with travel being opened up, you can definitely go. And as I went to Monza and with my wife on the honeymoon, it was fantastic. We got to see the 1-2 from McLaren.
Yeah, the jealousy is still overwhelming.
It would definitely have to go see one. But yeah, some of the other stories out on track. Sainz, unfortunately, kind of moved back 2 spots. He had a slow stop that did really hamper him, especially with the battle on track with Ricardo. And then Bottas kind of resurged up there to get past him. Bottas, you would have forgot that he was even racing today, other than the fact that Tsunoda blocked him for like 20 laps.
The widest driver in F1, Yuki Tsunoda.
That's one thing I gotta hand it to him. He's had some really bad races, but the one thing that he's good at is that if you're behind him and he's on it, you're not getting past him.
I feel like he knows that he can really mess up, but if he can hamper a Mercedes, Helmut Marko and Christian Horner are happy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. He definitely helped him out in the constructors today. So. Big points haul for Red Bull. A little bit disappointing for Mercedes with Bottas down in P6.
Yeah, but they kind of had to expect something along those lines when they gave him an engine penalty and he started in 15th because he's on his 6th internal combustion engine.
Yeah, and that wasn't fair, really, because you would have had him starting at P4. Yeah. And you would have had a much better opportunity when it came to the strategy.
The team battle.
Yeah, because on the long runs, Bottas was quite good too, but then you're going to put him in traffic, and as we've been seeing, it's not very easy to pass in traffic.
No.
Like, everyone on today was anywhere from like maybe 1 places, 2 places in terms of movement on track, with the exception being Raikkonen, who was up, not Raikkonen, Russell was up 6 places, but we had 3 DNFs in the race, so a little bit of help there. And then you've got the Haas on track, which I had nothing written down about them because I forgot they were even there.
Which is extra sad because this is technically the Haas home Grand Prix. And I don't think we would have gone this far into talking about a race if it was any other team's home Grand Prix, because I just forgot until you brought up that Haas was racing. I was like, oh yeah, they're American, and we were in Texas. You know what I mean? Every other team goes big when it's their home Grand Prix. You were at Monza, right? So you know how big the Ferrari fandom and how serious they take that level of home race. They bust out special liveries. They have like special events. I didn't even see one Haas flag or anything in the stands. They were probably the least represented team in their own home country, which is probably pretty painful.
They didn't even showcase them. There was no video coverage of the Haas car ever. I can't remember, honestly, on one hand, let alone two fingers, the time I saw the Haas on track. They just always showed something else, so I completely forgot they were there.
The only time you see the Haas is when one of the top two are lapping them, and it's usually Nikita getting in their way.
That is true, yeah. On that last stint where it looked like...
it was actually Mick this time.
Yeah, it was 3 laps from the end.
And Mick was holding up Max. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Max was holding up Mick. Mick was holding up Max, and then they got the DRS there from the back marker.
Which I think kind of, if Max didn't get that DRS, I don't know if we'd be looking at a different race, but I think the conversation around the incident would be a lot different between, they'd be like, oh, was Mick holding up Max? But him getting the DRS helped him separate from Hamilton, I feel like, and help break up the little bit of time he lost being behind Mick. Because Mick got out of the way after the turn. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be a talking point. It was like just about to be a talking point if he was in front any longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult point because when he decided to get out of the way, it was after that really fast right-hander of 14-15. Mm-hmm. It's 13-14, and then you have that it was turn 16 is where we had the track limits. But it's that really fast kind of triple apex right-hander.
Yeah.
And Mick decided on blue flags to go ahead of Max in that sector. And you're following a car going high speeds, and these cars lose so much grip being in dirty air. And that was kind of a bit of a pain, because at that point Max had actually pulled away and started to pull a bit more of a gap on Lewis and was starting to get the upper edge. And then Mick decided, instead of just pulling off to the side and letting them both through, because you can see they're both through, you know, they're going to make the argument that they didn't see anything in these mirrors, but they can see tearaways in the mirrors.
Yeah, right. So, and it's not like they don't have a whole team of people barking in their ear being like, oh, yeah, Lewis and Max are behind you, and it's not like there's a dude waving flags or anything. There's more than enough ways to alert the driver.
Yeah, I know that we are not even watching Haas, but I feel like their own watchers on track are not watching them because they're not being told, hey, 1 and 2 are battling behind you, and you're like fighting for literally nowhere. Move out of the way.
Yeah, it seems like every other weekend, Nikita especially, and I don't want to pile up on him, but Mick knows he's in a trash car and usually gets out of the way pretty well. This is probably like the first, one of the only, maybe 3 times Mick has like held up traffic, but it seems to be like Nikita got a black and white flag waved at him this weekend. We didn't even see that because he was hampering somebody, but it just seems to a point where like, I don't want to say, like, are the Haas's dangerous on track because they're so far off the pace? Yeah. But, like, they're so far off the pace that it's honestly, like, another obstacle on the track.
Well, 3 seconds was the gap in qualifying. Or even actually more than that. In qualifying, they were doing a 1:37, and pole lap ended up being a 1:33.9. So, like, almost 4 seconds back on pace. It is sad to see, really. Like, Haas, not many years ago was up there in like 5th, 4th in the championship.
They came in storming.
Right, they came in storming big time, and now it's like it's really tragic to see, especially like on home soil. The team's on home soil. There's no coverage. It's nothing to write home about. Hopefully next season is a big push. It looks like there's a lot of American money coming into the sport now, with talks of Andretti taking over Alfa Romeo, and Andretti making a lot of big moves. Formula E team as well, and they have Grosjean as their driver, so.
Have you seen the meme where it's like Grosjean steps to get back into F1? Like, yes. Sign with IndyCar, do really well, convince your owner to buy an F1 team, become an F1 driver again.
Absolutely, it's completely perfect because when you really think about it, he's kind of hitting all those points.
Literally.
To go back to Haas, it's just unfortunate. There's really nothing to say about them. But the biggest mover on track, and I'm surprised didn't get driver of the day, was actually Sebastian Vettel.
Shout out to Seb.
Yeah, started from P18 because he had to take an engine penalty and actually fought up to P10 and got the single point for Aston Martin this weekend. So a great thing to kind of go home with, especially being a track difficult to pass on because of a lot of high-speed sections that the cars just, they struggle with. Seb made the best of a bad situation and got to P10.
And especially the last time he was out here, it was when he was in his abusive relationship with Ferrari. Actually, well, this was still in the honeymoon period. This is before Seb and Ferrari actually really hated each other. And his car basically lightning McQueened itself from the rear.
He turned into a lowrider on the first corner.
yeah. Which is also like when you rewatch that footage, it's really, you have to take how good of a driver Seb is to control an F1 car losing. Like the front end was lifting up, so the thing wants to take off like an airplane. He's on 3 wheels, and he still kind of like nicely pulls off to the side and parks the car. Like most people would shit their pants. Like you see people like, I don't know, everyday drivers hit a patch of ice and all of a sudden end up in a 6-car pileup because they freaked out. This dude's doing 200 miles an hour. It's like, oh yeah, my car's suspension fails, pulls off to the side. Those guys are just different.
They are completely built different. But that's just also the challenges of the Circuit of the Americas track. It's just how bumpy it is that it completely destroyed the suspension on that car. But good job, Seb. Like P10. The single point for them. Sonoda, he moved up a position, had those great defensive battles as well. Norris, we're going to talk about Norris here. It's just...
So, I was thinking, Norris, I was going to give him the win. I thought he was going to win. I have a lot of faith in him. I don't know what it is. I don't know. You can't really put your finger on it because it's not that he did anything wrong. He didn't do anything great. I just feel like this was a weekend where Lando just didn't show up. He didn't shoot himself in the foot, but he definitely didn't show up and bring his AA game.
He did what he could. He actually had really good pace behind Sainz for the majority of the race, but I think it was just a little bit too aggressive too early, and just got the elbows out, not just with Sainz, but his teammate. And that could have ended really poorly on the first lap. Yeah. So probably after that, kind of had to pull it back quite a bit.
And play the team game because now McLaren is sitting ahead of Ferrari.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the points I wanted to go over too. 3.5 points, that gap now, between McLaren and Ferrari. Ferrari got a big points haul today. Is Leclerc, all he did was just drive a really good race like Leclerc does. Yeah. And started in 4th and finished in 4th and picked up some big points for Ferrari. Unfortunate what happened with Sainz. It's just he got into those two incidents. He got into the first scrap with Norris just diving on him in turn 1, and then we had that incident where... it was a racing incident, really, trying to make the move around the outside of Danny Rick. Danny Rick got a little bit of...
put those elbows out, son.
Got those elbows out. Got the Dominator out there.
He's wearing that Texas Longhorn jersey.
Yeah, and got some... and ended up with a little bit of damage to the front wing of Sainz's cars. So, but still salvaged the P7 out of it. But big points haul for both of them. And both of them actually finishing ahead of their respective other McLaren driver. So this is really coming down to the wire here.
There are a lot of battles that are coming down to the wire. Like everybody really wants to focus in on Max and Lewis.
Yeah, 12 points now.
But McLaren and Ferrari, that team battle is pretty damn spicy too. And Norris is 1 point behind Checo for 4th in the Drivers' Championship too.
Yeah, that's also quite surprising. But I think that's going to... I don't know. I can see that gap is not going to come back over. I don't think Norris is going to pass Checo on the points for the rest of the season. I don't think so. I think this is the form that we've been seeing from Checo. The past 2 races, we've got 2 podiums from him now.
And he's going to Mexico for the next race. I think Checo is going to go Super Saiyan in Mexico. If there's any place that he's going to go.
Oh yeah, he's going Super Mariachi. He's going all the way in there. Yeah, and traditionally, they're really fast at that track. Red Bull is very fast at that track, especially because the heat is not very kind to the Mercedes car. They have fixed that in recent years, but typically when it's a really high humidity, the Mercedes car has a little bit of struggles. But yeah, and also traditionally Perez, that's a really good track for him.
But I was also going to say, traditionally, Kota is a Mercedes track. Yeah. This is the first time since in the turbo hybrid era that they didn't qualify on pole.
Yeah.
So the whole narrative could be flipped, trying to guess, oh, this is a Mercedes track, this is a Red Bull track. I think we need to start throwing all of our assumptions out of the window here.
That's true.
Because it's really coming down to the wire.
And with coming down to the wire, actually, one of the things that's going to kind of eke in there is the reliability. We're talking now a lot of cars. Well, specifically, we've been looking at the Mercedes, but 3 different Mercedes cars this weekend had engine penalties in terms of swapping out parts. Now, I find it's a little bit excessive for Bottas, but maybe there's something going on that we don't see.
I think they're guinea pigging Bottas. I think there's some, I don't want to say fundamental, but there's some little tweaks in that engine unit that I think they gave to Bottas to see what his data was, to see if it's worth Lewis taking a 5-place grid penalty to put it in this new engine or running with whatever he has left.
No, that is a very sound argument. Absolutely, that's probably exactly what they're doing, and everyone's getting all salacious with it of like, oh, they're trying to sabotage Bottas. That's the stupidest thing. Like, they're still leading the Constructors' Championship at this point.
They need him so they could win the Constructors' Championship, right? Like, Bottas is the weird key in the Constructors' Championship for Mercedes. Like, he's the weird linchpin that they still need to kind of appease to a certain extent. Like, I don't think Valtteri's the kind of guy to sandbag a team because he's not going to be there next year, but they definitely don't want to poke the bear too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's especially funny that, I mean, he's got the bag of engines now, so no matter what for the rest of the year, he doesn't really need to take an engine penalty.
No.
Because we know that's going to happen with the Red Bulls soon, is they're going to have to take an engine. I mean...
No, they did.
Max took one in Sochi.
Yeah.
Perez, when did he take an engine penalty? I think it was recent for him too.
Yeah, I think they got him out of the way because that was the whole.
It was after Hungary; they had to get them both out of the way.
Yeah, because I remember that's what one of the big talking points was like. Okay, so when's Lewis going to take his engine? And I think he did recently as well.
Yeah, he did. It was in Turkey.
Yeah,
it was just the engine and the exhaust. It wasn't like the full rebuild.
Yeah, Max knew everything. They got turbos, like internal combustions, everything.
Well,
it's interesting.
It's they've also had incidents where they had to swap out those units, which thankfully we did not see one of those today.
Yeah,
thankfully there was no incidents like that. But so now the gap in the championship: 12 points for Max and Lewis. 36 points or so, was it, the gap between Mercedes and Red Bull, and then 3.5 points, McLaren and Ferrari. So
that's going to be intense.
That's going to be a great rest of the season.
All right, so before we wrap it up here, out of 10, what would you give this race with everything wrapped up involved? I know we said there was the soft middle portion and all of that, but out of a solid, out of 10, what would you give this race?
I give it a hard 6. I was thinking 7 because the last 3 laps were pretty exciting in terms of just how the strategy built up to it. I think it's more just that middle section when everyone was trying to see what was going to be the optimal time to come in for that last stop and really push it on that last set. Really was kind of a bit boring.
It was a Mexican standoff during the middle to see who was going to pit win.
Yeah, and it just really came down to undercut versus overcut, what was going to work best. But the beginning... very argy-bargy, couple nice battles in the middle, and the end having a nice little punch, but overall, not an incredibly exciting race. I don't know, maybe upon reflecting it just like this, I'll give it a 7. I'll give it a 7. Soft 7.
See, that's a solid rating. So I'm going to start off by saying if this race took place in 2020, it would be a fucking 10 out of 10. Compared to everything that we saw last year where it was just like a Hamver bot and like they were just so far. And it wasn't in the races that they were beating each other in, it would be like Lewis is 4 seconds ahead of Max or Max is 4 seconds ahead of Lewis. It wasn't really competitive. But we've been spoiled this year with all types of great close battles. So I'm sticking with you. I'm saying this is a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
I just have to preface it with how spoiled we've been this year of great races.
There have been some phenomenal races all year. And I mean, a 7 is not, in comparison to some of the other races this year, a 7 is not a bad race. It was a good race. But yeah, 7.
It's just what we're comparing it to, right? Like I said, last year, this race would have probably been a 10 out of 10, or like that's an exaggeration, at least a 9, but compared to everything else this year, solid 7. Like you said, it had great battling at the beginning, great battling at the end, and that it's just really nice to see Max and Lewis like 1-2 coming in behind each other with like less than a second. Like those last 3 laps were pure pucker material. Like you didn't know what was going to happen, and it turned out that Lewis was the one who made the slightest error, and that's what basically gave Max enough space to breathe. Mm-hmm. It was whoever made that tiny error first, I believe, would have been the one to end up in second. But the other thing I wanted to quickly bring up before we get out of here is Lewis's reaction. So we watched it live, and Lewis kind of just moped off into the garage.
He's pretty upset about this one.
I get that he's a competitor, and I understand. And he to his credit, he kind of just fucked off and then decompressed and came out and did his stuff. And I believe that's best because it was heartbreaking for him. I can only imagine. But I just wanted to bring that up and see what you thought about how Lewis handled himself after the race. I'd say.
I feel it's because he knew he made that mistake, and when we're talking about that mistake, it was turn. I want to say it was turn 10, the kind of like hairpin onto that back straight.
Yeah, he didn't get a good exit.
He got a really poor exit, and that poor exit actually gave enough of a gap to Max, and Max was able to get outside the DRS range. And that was kind of the turning point of those last two laps. So he lost that DRS range, which is what he was striving for so long. And that's probably why he was so upset with himself, because he really looked dejected with that P2. He didn't feel that P2 is what he deserved. He feel like he deserved that win. And he put in a stellar drive.
He drove his ass off.
Absolute stellar drive. It just didn't work out on strategy in the end of the day, because it's one thing to catch up to them. It's another one to pass them on this track. Mm-hmm. And it turned out it worked really well for Max to do the undercut versus the overcut with Lewis. But we did not see a replay of Barcelona or Hungary.
No.
It was a replay of actually none of those. It was just it worked out.
It was its own fresh story.
Its own fresh story.
Well, that concludes our first ever episode of the Chasing Sixx podcast. We're going to be here recapping races for the rest of the season. Did we start with only a few races left? Yes, but better now than never. We'll be going off into the off season with a few other projects and whatnot, but make sure to join us next week for our next race recap. I've been Chase. You can follow me on mostly everything at Chase Me.
And I'm takesixx. You can follow me mostly at Too Many Hobbies T6, where of course we have the Too Many Hobbies blog, and then of course on Twitch with at takesixx.
And thank you for joining us, everybody. We hope to see you next week.